All right. So let's get started. And hey, James, good to see you here. Let's get started with this right now. Let me just make sure it's recording. It is okay. Hey, folks, my name is Phil Zito, and welcome to the Integration for Building Automation webinar. I am the CEO of Smart Buildings Academy. We are the fastest growing provider of building automation training in the world. I have a background in system integration, cybersecurity, architecture, sales, project management, a little bit of everything, right? Prior to starting Smart Buildings Academy, I was working as the integration program manager at Johnson Controls, where I built backnet stacks, APIs, built all sorts of complex integrations. So you could say integration in some ways is in my blood. I've kind of just have a natural knack for it. So what I'm going to try to do as we move through this webinar is to impart what seems to come fairly intuitively to me to you. So it's going to be a little different probably than past webinars. You know, if you've attended our webinars in the past, we tend to use a lot of demonstrations and very few slides. So this should look a little different because we're going to look at some live integration and stuff like that. All right. Let's dive in. So the first thing we're going to go through is we're going to go through what is integration. We're going to get really clear on that. We're going to go through the integration process. We're going to get clear on that. We're going to go through a live integration process example, take a look at deliverables, checklists, etc. And then we're going to look at integration implementation. For simplicity's sake, today I'm going to focus primarily on two virtual machines that I stood up today that are running backnet stacks that I coded. This is something that we use in our system integration course, and so we'll use this for our webinar today. All right, let's get started. Oh, and by the way, if you have any questions, type them into the question box. That way we can answer them towards the end. If I don't answer your question as we're moving through this, it's because I know that we're going to cover it at the end or during some time in the webinar. Otherwise, if you have clarifications, just ask. Alrighty, so what is integration? Integration is the act of combining two or more systems in order to achieve a use case. I think in my experience, a lot of people forget that integration, we're trying to achieve something. When you integrate a lighting system into a building automation system, which is one of the more common integrations, you are trying to achieve something. Sometimes it's trying to bring the building automation data over to the lighting system to drive occupancy. Sometimes it's trying to pull the lighting data into the building automation system for greater visualization and operator efficiency. But the important point here is that you understand this use case. In my experience, when integrations go wrong, it's usually one of three things. Either folks do not understand the protocols, they don't go through the integration process, which we'll cover in just a little bit, or they don't understand the use case. And that's especially prevalent in plan and spec and some design build work where you have almost no interaction with the owner, and thus you do not know the intent of the use case. You just see, hey, refer to this division spec on integrating XYZ system. And you've got to try to figure out why are you even doing it, because the why, as we'll see later in this webinar, will drive the how. So as I mentioned, right, the most important part is understanding the use case. Now, what are the three types of integration? I hesitate to put this one, but it gets called out as integration in specs, so I include it in our categories, even though I don't think it's integration. And that is physical interfacing. This is like grabbing a dry contact off your fire alarm system for general secondary monitoring of alarms, right? You're interfacing with a system. You are not integrating the system. You're just grabbing some wires off the system and interfacing it into yours. Usually this is monodirectional, meaning that it's coming from the system and into your system. It's not going back and forth. It's not unidirectional or bidirectional, I guess you would say. It is unidirectional. Now, protocol integrations are the most common integration type that you're going to deal with. It's what we're going to extensively focus on in this webinar. These are, BACnet integrations, LAN integrations, DALI, KNX, whatever, Modbus, and any of those protocols, right? I don't need to name them all out. But protocol integrations, the primary areas we need to focus in on here are making sure that the data is available to us as needed by the use case, and then ensuring that we understand how to set up the protocols. Usually the physical aspects of setting these up is not very difficult. It's the protocol aspects, the protocol configuration, and it is not understanding that the data exists. I mean, how many folks have integrated a chiller or an air handler and the specification calls to reset DAT or to reset chilled water supply, and you go and you integrate that system only to find out that it doesn't even have a chilled water supply set point, and you have to go and run a 0 to 10 connection to the terminal blocks inside the chiller or inside the air handler. It happens all the time because folks don't have an integration process. They just kind of hope that they can integrate the system. They don't really go read up on what the BACnet card for this example is capable of. So protocol integrations, as I mentioned, main issues are data, and they are going to be configuration of the protocol. And now we have programmatic integrations that are starting to come about. And these are things like APIs. Let me see if I can bring up an example real quick of one for you. Is it this one right here? Yeah. So I took the yet another BACnet Explorer stack and I wrote up an API service that runs in the background in C#. And what I did was basically to read this weather station API, and we can kind of see that up here. And I'm reading the API, reading the data from it, and then from that, I am actually running a Windows server that writes the API data out as basic BACnet server so that I can take that data and route it into a building automation system via BAS. And this would run as a service on a server. Now, this is very much prototype code, but you're kind of getting the idea of what a programmatic integration is. Good news is there's a lot of graphical tools to help you with that in case you don't know how to write code. It is where the industry seems to be heading on integrations. We're seeing more API consumption, and we're seeing the need to understand JSON, XML, and processing all of that. For those of you who are like 5 minutes into this and you're like, oh my gosh, he's talking about APIs and XML and JSON, this will go a little technical, but at the same time, it will also have some very operational processes in this webinar. So please, even if you're not a technical person, stay engaged because the process things are going to be very important to understand. So key points I want you to take from this are that there are 3 types of integrations. One of them is not really integrations, in my opinion. The second is the type of integration will determine your actions. So if you've got protocol or programmatic or interfacing, you're going to do different things. You're going to engage at different times in the project. And the most important part of integration is understanding the use case. So let's dive into the integration process. But before I do that, does anyone have any questions on that section? I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? So if you've got any questions, feel free to type them in. If not, I'm going to start diving through the integration process. I'll come back to your questions though. Okay, so let's first off start by identifying the use case, right? We want to understand the purpose of the integration, who's going to be using it, and how it'll be used. And I'll talk through both what a business use case as well as a technical use case looks like. And we'll talk about a use case diagram, which I like to do in UML format, which is basically, I'll explain that in just a little bit. Identify the data types and systems, right? We want to identify the types of data being exchanged, the protocols being used, and the systems being integrated. And then we want to implement the integration. So we want to implement this integration. We want to test the implementation and specifically create the lifecycle support plan. Now, I know this for some of you is going to seem like a lot of work. I'm not necessarily suggesting that if you're integrating a train chiller into a tritium system, that you go through all these steps in the level of detail I'm about to show you. However, if you're like me, where you used to do highly complex integrations like consuming HL7 systems from healthcare and then pulling them into room control and interfacing with nurse call and all sorts of stuff, then it becomes very important when you're dealing with 10, 20 different systems and data flows to get very process oriented. And so I'm going to teach you a process in this webinar. You can scale back the process based on the level of complexity of the system you're integrating. Hopefully that makes sense. So identify the use case. The use case should define who will use the integration, who is the user, because who the user is going to be very important to understand, because it will dictate how you visualize data. It'll dictate how you run your support plan. It'll dictate how you implement the integration at so many different levels. How it'll be used. I mean, how will it be used? Does it need to be like stupid simple, or does it need to be complex? My rule of thumb is make it as simple as possible for the user. What systems does the use case entail? Like, what is in the use case? What is in there? What systems are we using? And then how will it be validated and how will it be supported? So we're going to talk through identifying the use case. We're going to look at a couple PDFs real quick from our system integration bootcamp course. Let me find my PDF viewer wherever it went. Oh, let's see, where did it go? There it is. Here we go. All right, so you'll often start, if you're involved in a project, prior to tendering the project, prior to entering the design phase like SDs, DDs, and CDs. Does everyone know what SDs, DDs, and CDs mean? And what that means as far as the construction document development lifecycle? Basically what they are, so you start off with a schematic. Think about your house, right? You go to purchase a house and you're having a house built for yourself. You often will start off with a schematic, and it's just the basic track home schematic. And then from there, you're going to get into some details, right? You're going to say, well, maybe we want to add on this room, et cetera. And so that's kind of the detail phase. And then you get to the actual construction phase, construction document phase, which is CDs, where it's like, these are these very specific details on how it's going to be built. So you go from saying, I want a 2-floor house with an air conditioning unit to, I want the floors to be laid out like this, to, hey, this is exactly the size of posts we're going to use. Like, we're going to use 2x8s instead of 2x6s, etc. It gets more detailed as the project development goes on. Hopefully that makes sense. So when a business use case comes into play, and this is for those of you who want to sell to enterprises, or those of you who internally want to create use cases for your business units, this is what you should start off with. Often find that the people who hold the purse strings, if we send them this, a performance spec, or we send them this, a project scope template, they're going to be confused. They're going to say, okay, what's this do for me? So what I like to do is I like to go and say, all right, business use case right here, right? I want to identify the pain point. And you'll notice I've highlighted for you the pain points, right? Main issue, what's the scope? It's the 3 buildings. What's the issue? It's difficulty of controlling the lighting and air conditioning easily through a mobile device. Pretty basic problem that a lot of folks experience. The difficulty of controlling the lighting and air conditioning easily through a mobile device is causing, so this is a template that you fill in, right? You fill in the main issue, boom. Where is it at? And then what is the main issue? And then you go and you reiterate the issue right here is causing blank and blank. And this is a template we have in our system integration bootcamp course. So then we say, we are proposing blank. And we say phase 1, tying the existing access control system into the lighting system can resolve. So this is the action. It can resolve the issue resulting in blank. This is how you would write it to an executive that you would be presenting. Obviously, you'd have numbers and projections and ROIs, etc. This is just a simple example. So from here, you will usually get funding, usually. And once you get some funding to work with, that's when you drive a performance specification. And most of the time in integrations, we are building on performance specifications. Now, for those of you who are like, when are you getting to the integration? I just want to let you know, this is very important if you're going to do large scale integrations. So stick with me here. We will get to the technical side of this, but if you don't do this, you'll never have an integration project on any scale to be able to execute. So from that business use case, we build out a performance specification, and we want to focus on the outcome, not the how. We want to avoid being too prescriptive. We want to allow for different technologies and techniques to achieve the end result. And we want to place boundaries on non-negotiables. So we'll see, right? We're taking our access control to the lighting system integration. And we have weather data from a web source to the building automation system. And we talk about what the existing requirements for the contractor is, and then we go into technical description of the use case. Upon arrival, the tenants are going to badge into the building via the access control system. Access control system is going to communicate badging status to the lighting system. Within a set parameter, the lighting system shall occupy or enable zones. So this is getting pretty prescriptive, right? We're not yet where we need to be to actually do the integration, but this is what we're going to focus on in this webinar, is this integration right here. Okay, so at this point, we have went and laid out our integration, what we want to do. Now we need to go and understand the scope. And so we will go and detail out the scope. It's here that we will use a project scope template. And we're going to detail out what is the integration. We're going to talk about the deliverable. And we're going to talk about the project tasks that we need to do for the deliverable. So we're going to get very clear on our scope, get very clear on out of scope, get very clear on assumptions. Once we've done all this, then we can take that project that was funded and we can bid it, or we can give a more formal price. All right, so from there we are going to move on to identifying the data types and systems. We're going to start to build out our data model, we're going to start to build out our use case model, and we're going to start to build out our system architectures. So we need to start focusing on our data types. We need to focus on what data points do we need. We need to focus on how do we access that data, and what systems do we connect with and how. So normally, if you're doing like a chiller integration or something, I would just type in the chiller's BACnet interface card or LAN card model, and I would look up the data types, and I would say, okay, these are BACnet AVs, so that means that they're writable, so I can use those points, or they're BACnet AIs, that means they're not writable, so I can't use those points. However, when you get to more complex integrations, and give me a second here to bring this up, you're going to have to start to build out some actual integration deliverables. So how I like to build out integration deliverables is called the UML pattern. It's basically a UML method. And it's something that is used in IT integrations. And essentially it's the actor who's the user, right? So we have this user, and the user, most likely the tenant, is performing a badge entry swipe. And if it's successful, then it's going to return an integer of room number. Okay, and that room number is going to go into a table, and it's going to be checked, and that table is going to say, oh, this room number is associated with this device instance. Okay, and if the area is not enabled, then we're going to enable the lighting. If it is enabled, then we're going to do nothing. So the premise here is we're going to look at the room number that the badge swipe is occurring from, and we're going to say, hey, what device instance, and this will become important because oftentimes you will have data sets that have mismatches. You'll have card access may be called room number, lighting system may be called device ID, or you may have card that's for a space and lighting that's for a zone. So we need to do what's called data normalization. All right, and so we will look through how we do this and formulate kind of how we're going to do this, and then we'll use our data table, which I'll show you in just a second, to actually list out how this all works. So we're running a function, and I know this looks very programmatic. The reason I do this is because, and I know this is going to be uncomfortable to a lot of building automation folks because we don't think this way, but if you want to start working on complex integrations to non-building systems like flight traffic management systems or nurse call systems or telemetry systems, then you're going to be dealing with APIs and data types, programmatic data types. So you need to understand kind of what's an integer, what's a double, what's a float, and you need to understand functions like, hey, we got the check table function and it requires a integer that's room number and it returns the device instance. This in actuality, if I go into Niagara and I program it in Wiresheet, would be simply me taking a string, parsing that string into like a multiplexer, and then outputting a device instance. So that's how you would do it actually in the software. All right. I know this was pretty deep. Any questions so far on this? I see we've got a couple. Will we be sharing the recording? Yes. Can I get a copy of the scope? No, that's a deliverable in our course. Hi, the weather station is connected to the lighting control system or to the BAS. We may have time to talk about the weather station integration. But we'll see, because I want to make sure I have time to talk questions, and I'm going to be focused primarily on the access control to lighting integration. All right, and thank you. Okay, great. All right, let's continue along. Okay, so now we need to start considering the data. Okay, so what we're going to use here is a basic data structure for relational databases. We're going to have the access control system. We're going to see that the access control system data has a reader that is in form int, room number that is in form int, and reader state that is in form boolean. We see that it supports the function swipe badge, which returns the int reader, the room number, and boolean reader state. So you'll get this information by working with the manufacturers to understand their data structure. We can see that there's a dependency to a BAS interface, and that interface is actually going to take a device ID, which is going to get right here, right, reader int, and room number int A1, and reader state boolean B1. So these are the backnet points right here, right, A1 and B1. And then this is just the device ID. And it's going to compare that to a table. And based on that table, it's then going to have a device instance for the lighting associated with the zone, and it's going to set the level for the zone as well. And so we can see the dependency there. So how you would find this out is you would research the access control system, understand the data types it has and the functions it supports. You would find out the lighting system and the data types it has and the functions it supports. And you would figure out how well, the first question would be, do I need to do a reconciliation of data types? Or do I just simply pass through? In this case, we had to do a reconciliation because the lighting system was zone. It's actually called normalization of data. I should use that phrase. The access control system is a space-based, and the lighting system is a zone-based. So we have to do normalization of that data. There's normalization for data type mismatches as well as for data structure mismatches. That's a data structure mismatch, not a data type mismatch. All right, so from here, once we have that, and you can kind of see the reconciliation table right here, room number 1, area 1, zone 1, boom, 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 boom. And that's how we would do it. And then this is something that we could pass along, and the integration would actually be processed in our workstation. Okay, now we move over to system architecture. So here we want to then figure out, right, what is our system architecture? Let me go to it. What does it look like? We have an access control server with a switch, a building automation server with a switch, and we have a lighting server with a switch, and we have a router. So it's our basic architecture diagram, just so we know what we're working with. And this is also what we're going to fill our information on off of. And then we go from there to our fourth deliverable, which is going to be our system architecture with details. So we're going to say, okay, this is the access control server. What OS is it running? It's running Linux Ubuntu. It's in IDF rack 3 slot 7, the IP address. These are the ports we need open. Switch, where is it? How do we pass through? And we get all of our data, right? As I mentioned, physical setup is a really big mistake area that people make and mess up and don't properly integrate. Then they're wondering, like, why is my integration not working? Well, you're on a different subnet, right? I mean, I can't count how many times I've went out to troubleshoot. I mean, the simplest backnet integrations, and they're on different subnets, or one's 47808 and the other's 4707, or like as you'll see, Niagara's can do this as well as other systems. You go to discover, you hit OK, but you don't send it globally. You actually send it you just click OK, and then because you don't send it global, you don't discover all the systems. So understanding the physical setup and understanding the layout is going to determine your effectiveness. Naturally, I'm assuming you all understand the protocols when you're doing this as well. All right, so we've got this all figured out now, right? We figured out our data points. We figured out how we access the data, figured out what systems we need to connect with. We mapped this all out so our field implementers can implement it. And you can imagine, like, when you get to a 10, 20 integration project, how complex these can get. Like, you could have multiple different use cases, looking at the API ones. You can get pretty complex into the use cases. So by listing that all out, you're reducing that complexity and reducing the likelihood of failure. Okay, so now we need to move to implementing the integration. During the implementation phase, you really want to focus on a couple things. First, you want to install the devices. You want to actually make sure they're installed. I can't tell you how many times been called out to commission an integration and the server wasn't in the building. So you kind of got to make sure that's done. Next, you want to connect and configure the communication bus, whether that's an RS-485 MSTP, whether that's FT10 LAN, whether that's just IP and it's RESTful API, whatever it is, you want to connect it and configure it. And you're going to use your system diagram in order to do that. Then you configure your local settings based off that system diagram I showed you. And then you integrate the devices and you test the integration. Test the not just the success, but you also want to test the failure. So I challenge you to have failure scenarios. If you are going and you are integrating a weather station into your building automation system for outdoor air temp, to drive economizer, to drive chiller enable, to drive boiler enable, or hot water reset set point, you need to test what will happen when you lose access to that API. A lot of folks just say, oh, we've got the API working, we've got the weather data coming in, but they don't consider what happens when that goes off, when it fails. What is the failure state? So you need to have a failure state listed out. And that's really important, even for the most simple integrations, because what happens if something fails and people don't understand it? It gets put in hand. And that totally voids the whole point of having an integration and the business benefits associated with it when it gets put in hand. All right, so make sure you have a failure state. Let's talk about implementing the integration. So what I did for this, and one of them's still up and running, but let me turn the other one on. What I did for this is I actually went in and I built a backnet server that simulates an access control system, and I'm running it on a virtual machine. And then I've got another virtual machine firing up that, for whatever reason, it keeps closing itself. And that is simulating a lighting system. And then what I would do, right, is I would go and add these, right, add my lighting system, and I would add my access control system. So I just add them in here. And then once I had my access control system, right, I have it in there, then I would go and I would do my point discovery for my access control system, which is up and running, right? Is it? I may have shut it down. Hold on one second. There we go. I just turned it on. You can see right there. It's running. I initiated a UDP and MSTP and a point-to-point on it as well. So just wrote a little quick and dirty backnet stack. So I hit discover. It's going to fail. Let's let this one succeed. And do. Let's make sure. There we go. And we just got to wait for it to come through. Ah, I know what's wrong. Give me 1 second. I got to bring this one up real quick. Fun with live systems. So here we go. Oh, I know why. I know why that went down. Give me 1 second real quick while I bring up the lighting system. Discover, global, okay. There we go. All right, bring up that access control, backnet device 1010, network 100, use COV. Okay, good. All right, then we go to access control. All right, we're all set up good there. It's enabled, it's working. Go to points, go to discover. All right, we can kind of see it's doing that right there. You see read property multiple. So it's basically polling the system. And I get my room readers, right? So you can kind of see they come in. I've got my room card reader statuses. You see I've got AVs. I've got some binary inputs, BIs, and I have some other values right here, room reader, which would be kind of my room reader number. All right, and what I would do is I would just go map these points in. So go click here, just add them all in here real quick. And click add. So say, do we want to bring this stuff in? We'll just say yes. Okay. Pulled read only. I guess I could make AV to be an actual read value, but I mean, this is just a mock-up. So then I would go back to my backnet network right here and discover my lighting system. Let's just make sure that that guy comes through as well. That's already there. Okay. So we go lighting server, bring this guy in, discover points. It's going to bring in some points right here. I'm going to add those, click OK. And then what we would do from there is we would just go and create a wire sheet so we could actually go and set this up. So I would just, where do I want to put the wire sheet? We just put it, I guess we could put it under the system. Do an integration. We would add some points. So for example, this is going to be dirty. This isn't, I would do this a little bit more organized if we were doing a live system, but I'm just making an example here. So if I look back at my use case right here, I am taking device instance and I'm comparing it. Where's my data chart again? Let me bring that up. Here we go, room, and that goes to zone. So I would say, all right, there's my status. Okay, it's true. All right, we're good. And then I would say lighting server points. lighting level. And then basically I would say if this is true, then I write to this lighting level, although I would have to map this in as a writable and not as a readable. So I would just go into kit control and I would go and make this drive a selection based on what zone I'm trying to drive. All right. I'm not going to go too much deeper in that just due to time because we're running up on 12:40 and I want to dive into any questions once I go through a couple more things. All right. So what I want you all to know about this right here, implementing the integration, is first off, you shouldn't have to spend a whole terrible amount of time on installing the physical devices. That really should not be something that gets you too caught up. If you handle the system diagrams like I showed you, if you have the system diagram detailed like I showed you, the installation should be pretty easy. You do want to spend a fair bit of time on connecting and configuring the communication bus and configuring the logical settings. But where the majority of your time should actually end up is going to be integrating devices and testing the integration. This is where you want to spend the most of your time. Going back to what I mentioned, you want to make sure that you have failure modes in all of your use cases and that you test those as well. One thing I didn't mention is support. As you leave the job site, you want to make sure that there is a support plan. And I think I have an example of it. Give me 1 second here. Let me see if I can bring it up in the course. Go to it real quick. Here it is. Right, maintaining integrations. I'm gonna bring this up real quick and just show you. What you want to focus on is maintaining the physical devices, the applications, and the data flow. So the reason I'm spending time on this is most integrations will get executed and will be fine. The area where they tend to fail is within the first 6 months to 2 years, because maybe there's an API update, maybe there is a protocol change, maybe there's a system addition, and because there was no plan in place to actually go and maintain that, you find that folks will have the integration fail. Usually the person who implemented the integration is on another project, so the person who gets sent out can't really support it. And the action that is taken is to put the system in hand, and no one ever uses the integration again. I know that's kind of doom and gloom, but I've seen that happen so many times. So, making sure that you have this process of ensuring the physical devices work, ensuring that the applications are properly patched and working, and then making sure that your APIs all work, your data flows still match, and anything that is needed is not deprecated, which means removed in a version update. So I just wanted to go through that with you real quick. All right, let's go back to the presentation. So with that being said, that takes us up to 12:40. I wanted to leave 20 minutes for question and answer. So please refocus on this ultimately or utterly amazing fact that 100% of the questions that are not asked during this live Q&A session will not get answered. I know that is amazing. I know that's probably life-changing for some of you, but the reality is that if you don't ask a question, it for sure will not get answered. So we have a question from Scott, which is, will this wire sheet reside in the chase, the controller, or the server? So I was using Niagara just for an example due to market share. So in that case, the wire sheet would be in whatever device is facilitating the transfer of data. So in some cases, it may be a server, specifically when you're running services or APIs. So like if we were doing the service right here, if we were running the weather station API service, like if I open up the service, if we were running this service, then we would be running it on a server, most likely, not in a JSON or a controller, unless we made it a plugin that went into the actual Niagara framework. But if you wanted to just make it a Windows service, you'd run it on a server. That being said, If it is just a basic protocol integration, like what I was showing you, then you could run it through a Jace, you could run it through an Edge 10, any controller that has the capability to support the protocols. What you have to ask yourself whenever you do that, though, what you have to ask yourself is, do I want the data flow to go through a field controller? Do I want it through a supervisory device? What are my levels of separation that I want? Do I want it to have to go from a server through a supervisory device to a field controller? What do I want to do? That's a architecture conversation. How do you get a demo version of Niagara before getting into the integration business? We do sell a training kit on our website that has Edge 10s, Workbench, and parts and pieces that you can use in all of our courses. I would recommend checking that out. What other questions can I answer for y'all? What did y'all think? Is this a different way of integrating than what you've seen in the past? Does this give you a different look, a different perspective of how to go about integration? I know it's not exactly, hey, we've got this backnet chiller and we're going to map it into a BAS. But I hoped it would give you a look at what I see coming in the future. All right. Can I keep the demo version of Niagara after the training, or is it only good during the training? So you get 1 year access to it for the kit we sell. I don't necessarily want to turn this into a product pitch of our solutions, but you could definitely reach out to us after the webinar and I can point you in the right direction. I want to make sure that I'm answering people's integration questions and giving them value for the time they chose to take out of their day. Alrighty. How soon will this be viewable? I want to watch it again later. Probably within 1 to 3 hours. You should get an email. It'll go up on our YouTube. It'll also go up on our website. Do any of y'all have any specific architecture integration questions, or maybe use cases you're struggling with, or maybe you have an implementation strategy that you would like to discuss? I've seen a lot of stuff. I've integrated a lot of different systems. What gateway does access control system manufacturers use to integrate with a BIS? It really depends on the protocol. So depends on if you're using a database protocol, like you're doing a SQL query, or if you're doing an API, or if you're doing kind of more of a custom protocol. So, and it also depends on the building automation system itself. So some building automation systems will support API and database consumption directly in. Others will only support backnet. So it just depends on the systems that the building automation system supports, the protocols rather, as well as the protocols and data flow types that come out of access control, lighting, AV, parking management, workforce, CMMS, any of the regular suspects, the usual suspects, I guess I would say. What else can I'm going to lower my desk here so I can sit down. I've been on calls all day. But that being said, what else would you all like to know? Kind of flew through this. Is it feasible to integrate a access control system and lighting with BAS in a residential building? It depends. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. Feasibility, I do not necessarily look at the vertical market or the building type as the dictator of feasibility. I look at the use case and the ROI associated with that use case as the dictator of the feasibility. So, for example, if you are trying to drive to a high end luxury condominium tenant then it may make sense to integrate access control and lighting with building automation. Although I would say in those cases, in the residential sector specifically, I would focus on some of the more common Amazon or Google Home platforms because of the diversity of solutions they offer. But that being said, if if you're dealing with something that actually is using a commercial grade access controller, commercial grade lighting, or commercial grade building automation system, then the feasibility comes from the ROI. So if you go and spend the money on investing in these technology platforms and you implement them, will that draw tenants who are accepting of your higher cost for these luxury condominiums or luxury apartments? Uh, if that answer is yes, and you can see a projected increase in rentals and leases, then it could potentially make sense for that vertical. At the end of the day, it's all about ROI, return on investment. That's why we started off with the business use case. Okay. Is there a limitation on the number of devices to integrate, or is there a good documentation to read regarding that? So as far as limitation of devices to integrate, that is such a integration specific question. So what I like to answer, how I like to answer that question is I look at, is there a limitation to complexity? And what I mean by that, let me get clear on that. I could go and take this access control use case and do the weather API use case at the same time in the same use case. The problem with doing that is now we start to get complexity that is not necessary. We start to make things confusing because we start to intermix data models, we start to intermix system architectures, and from a testing and troubleshooting perspective, it becomes much more difficult because is it the weather API? Is it the server running the API? Is it the backnet link between the access control or between the weather API? What is causing the system failure? So my answer to you is it's not a physical limitation of integrations and data flows, although it can be depending on the server CPU capacity, all of that. It's more of a limitation in you want to be specific to a single use case. It's kind of that single use principle that is in programming. So single use case and the systems associated with that single use case. And that's how you build out your design deliverables. How does Workbench compare to Site Builder as far as ease of use? That's a very subjective question that I can't really give an answer to. For some folks, I would imagine they would say Site Builder is much easier. For others, they would say Workbench is much easier. It really depends on your level of familiarity and your background. You know, Workbench is very much built with programmers in mind, in that you can dive into the program editor and get into the Java and mess around with things. Site Builder is also got capabilities. So I've worked with both. I can't say one's necessarily less complex than the other. It's really just what do you know? Okay. Let's see what's next. Is it feasible to integrate? Is there a limitation? Regarding the number limitation, is there a line to decide whether to use DDC versus PLCs or BACnet over Modbus based on the number of devices and number of the I/O? Okay, so I just went through this conversation with one of our students the other day. They're looking at using a PLC system at one of their facilities in lieu of a DDC, and they've got DDC in the rest of their buildings, and they've got PLC in this one. So PLC is programmable logic controller, DDC is direct digital control, for those of you who don't know. PLC is more akin to a building automation architecture, whereas DDC tends to focus on the field controllers, and BAS is actually the whole system. So that being said, it depends on what you're trying to do, and it depends on who's engaged with what you're doing and how you're doing it. So for example, if I'm doing largely industrial systems, or maybe I'm doing a data center or something like that, it may make sense to do PLCs. It may make sense to do Modbus or OPC or whatever protocol you're using with your PLC, because of the vertical market you're serving and the building type you're serving is going to necessitate staff and support people who have a different set of skills. So PLCs would make sense. In other cases, like if it's commercial or hospital or K through 12 or higher ed, I would not recommend PLCs in those cases. You would struggle to find many PLC vendors that have the expertise to work in those vertical markets and really understand the systems and functionality associated with it. So it's not really a limitation, because you can use virtual servers, you can use elastic servers, etc., to scale capacity of integrations. So it's not a capacity and resource limitation, it's more of a which tool do you apply based on the type of building and the environment. Things related. Oh, here we go. Do you teach how to create the backnet stack or any other things related to development in your integration bootcamp course? We do teach, I would say, at like a 10,000 foot level, how to create a backnet stack. We go through it. I really don't recommend creating a backnet stack from scratch. Having done it 3 times, I highly recommend buying other folks' backnet stacks, licensing it, and using it. What I really recommend for developers is understanding the ASHRAE 135 standard, understanding the data types required for the functions as well as the returns. And especially when you're dealing with MSTP and somewhat backnet IP, understanding the data formatting, understanding APUs and NPDUs, and understanding the backnet virtual connection layer, the BVCC, understanding those aspects. And we cover those at a high level in that. We definitely cover those at a deeper level in our backnet protocols course. Can Nest ecobee ring be integrated into a BAS? If they have an open API, I don't see why not. If you have the ability to go to the Nest ecobee ring API and do a JSON query and grab data out of them, then yeah, I don't see why you couldn't bring them into a BAS, as long as there's some way to convert that JSON or XML response or that web service query into either backnet or whatever your building automation system accepts. Can I explain system integration with BTU metering systems? In my experience, the majority of BTU metering systems have been either Modbus, have either been a physical interface via a pulse, a 2-wire pulse, and based on the pulse, that would equate to things, or Modbus with a bunch of registers, or BACnet. So and when you do that, you just simply grab the data type, understand it, and then map in the appropriate points based on what your use case is. All right, I think we knocked them all out. Cool. Well, we got 5 more minutes. I'd be more than happy to take some more questions. Okay, that BTU question keeps popping up. I think that's a error because I just answered it. Excuse me. Sorry about that. What else can I answer for y'all? So there will be a survey at the end of this webinar. I highly encourage you to take that survey. Please, that will give us feedback on how we can improve this webinar, what topics you'd like us to cover in the future. I hope that you all found this valuable and it gave you a different perspective of integration. It gave you kind of a what's possible look, and it gave you an idea of what you may want to start studying and learning. as you decide to move deeper into the system integrator realm. I definitely believe that with the commercial market being as it is right now, we are going to see a lot of retrofits come up. And retrofits, I'll tell you from experience, having lived through 2008, retrofits kept me employed, and specifically integrations kept me employed. So I would highly encourage you to understand that. What is different between SCADA and building automation system? One's for industrial process control, and the other is for environmental control. I know folks will say, you'll see a lot of definitions of building automation, and folks will say building automation covers lighting and access control and all these things. Yeah, no. I mean, yes, it can, but the majority of BAS, if we're being real with each other, they're for HVAC control. I mean, you don't see a ton. You may see some lighting systems integrated to the BAS. I'm glad you enjoyed this course. Thanks so much. Or glad you enjoyed this webinar. All right, with the remaining 4 minutes, what else can I answer for you all? All right, well, hopefully this was a good use of your time, and I will stay here for the next 3 minutes for whatever questions you all have. You're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed this and you enjoyed the process and learning that. So you think integration would be replaced by an IT MSI instead of BAS, or do? Okay. So nothing new is ever under the sun, right? As the saying goes. We saw telecom, which was largely proprietary, POTS lines, etc., expensive. And then IP telephony came out, and then shortly followed that was the MSP model, master service provider model. I think what we will see, if I were a betting person, would be that we will continue to have OEMs that provide products. That's not going to go away. I talked about that in this week's podcast with Tyson. Um, and we talked about how APIs are largely not going to be embraced. And we're going to stick mainly with backnet systems, and manufacturers are going to keep creating their own hardware focused solutions. So what I see is I see integration really happening in the retrofit spaces initially, where it's going to be how do we consume data, how do we use integrations to take an older building and potentially give it new capabilities. That would most likely be executed by a MSI, but I hate the term MSI because I don't see how you separate a integrator from a building automation contractor, because the last thing you want is some tech guy who doesn't understand HVAC going and creating integrations to your chiller or to your outside air, and then shutting down your building. And because they're like, oh, I didn't realize I couldn't turn that point off. So I think there will always be a tie back to the trades. That being said, I think we will see companies that are more heavily revenuing from service and integration work than from product sales. Whether that will be distributors who they start to have, like Amazon starts to supply temperature sensors and actuators, so distributors are looking for another line of revenue, and so they start to take on professional services, or whether that looks like specialty contractors, that's to be determined. The cost of sales is really high to sell a smart building. And sorry, my throat's getting really dry here. I think that is going to keep a lot of people away. until systems get more open and they have APIs and other data sources that can be easily consumed as well as written to. How common is it to integrate BAS with fire alarm use cases? It's very common to interface BAS with fire alarm, like take a general secondary status off of a fire alarm with some dry contacts. It's not so common to do an actual integration. Does my estimating course offer guidelines for labor hours in regards to integration? It talks through the concept. It's definitely something that is usually project specific, and I would encourage you, if you're one of our students, to go and ask that question in our live office hours so that we could dive through that question in detail. It will teach you estimating. It'll teach you the 1/3 concept, which is, 1/3 material, 1/3 sub, 1/3 labor, which is actually not specifically accurate for integration because that tends to be more labor and tends to be very little material and very little sub, which is one of the big shifts when you're actually estimating integration. Do I provide a training certificate for this webinar? No, I do not. It's a good idea, though. I know other people do. What percentage of new buildings since 2018 are integrated fully? I have no idea. Probably pretty low based on my own experience, having been involved in a lot of projects. I would say below double figures, like 10% below. And plus, we've got to define what does fully integrated even mean, because your version of fully integrated may mean something different. Um, I think it fully integrated, and I see this term tossed around. This isn't at all judged towards you, so please don't take it that way. But I see folks say fully integrated. I more so see people say this on the sales side, like this building's fully integrated, or we're going to fully integrate your building. And I think to myself, well, what if it doesn't need to be fully integrated? What is the use case that will return the business value necessary? So that would be what I would say. How many buildings are optimizing their business value through integration? That would be the question I would ask. And the answer to that is very few. Building automation still largely is looked at a way to control your schedules, measure your HVAC performance, things like that. And because of that, um, I would say that, yeah, not very many are effectively integrated. I know that's a different answer. I hope I didn't come across as avoidant. It's just, I don't think it's the best way to ask the question. I mean, that's how I would position it if I was told I had an integration number that I had to go sell and I was being held responsible for that. I would go and call on my customers and I would understand their business. And I would understand how can I improve their business value, whether that's uptime, whether that's reliability, whether that's reduced operational cost, whether that's reduced energy spent, whatever the KPI is that they are looking for. I would then drive my integrations to achieve those KPIs. I think it'll be a much easier sell then. Good question though. What else can I answer for y'all? I always stay here until the questions run out. So I do appreciate, by the way, seeing a lot of students in here and some of the podcast listeners in here. It's good to see you all. Okay, well, not seeing any other questions. So, hey, thank you so much. Appreciate you all attending. Please make sure that you complete the survey when you exit the court or the webinar. Appreciate that. Next month's webinar is going to be on project management. So that will be coming up. Be sure to take a look at our webinar page. It should be up there shortly. So you can register for that. I think it's like November 9th. And then December's will be cybersecurity. So thanks a ton. I appreciate your time today. I hope this was valuable for you. Be sure to check out our courses as well at smartbuildingsacademy.com. Thank you so much, and you all have a wonderful rest of your day.